And so one of the particular members actually had some advice that I think really pertains to ethics. And his advice was always do the right thing, no matter how difficult. Sometimes you just have to follow your gut. So what that made me think of was actually a personal story of mine. Back in the spring of 1985, my wife and I lived in Tyler, Texas. We had 2 children. One of the kids was 2 years old, and the other was a newborn. And I had just gotten transferred from Tyler to Dallas, Texas. So I got on from a field office to a corporate office. And so I was on my job about a week, and I was in a meeting. I got back from the meeting, and on my desk was one of these pink telephone notes. And it said, call home, kid ate poison. So that really got my attention. First of all, I'm thinking, what assistant would write down that? Call home, kid ate poison. I still remember her name, Julie. But anyway, so I picked up the phone, I called home, and what I found out was, kind of give you some of the background here, being in a field location, you have all this equipment in the trunk of your car that has to do with being out in the field in the natural gas business. So one of the things that I took out of my trunk was this small box of something called dragger tubes. And these tubes look a lot like pixie sticks. So to a 2-year-old, those are very attractive. And so the 2-year-old had gone into the garage. My wife and the newborn and the 2-year-old going somewhere. He gets into these sticks and actually breaks them open and eats some of the beads that are inside the stick. The problem was that we didn't know what was in the beads. So when they took him to the hospital, they didn't know what to do. They didn't know whether or not to make you throw up. They didn't know whether or not to give you milk or whatever. So the safety coordinator in Tyler, Texas, actually called Germany to try to find out, this is where these things were manufactured, to try to find out what is in these beads. And we found out that it was copper acetate. Once we knew that, the hospital knew how to treat him. He turned out he was fine. So I won't leave the room with the anxiety of that piece of information. But what happened after that was what impressed me, and I think it pertains to ethics. About a week later, we had a letter from the CEO of the Tracker Company, and it was a fairly lengthy letter expressing remorse for this incident. So somewhere between the time that these Texans called these Germans, that information got to this CEO, and he took the time to write me a letter. And I can guarantee you he had a whole army of lawyers telling him, don't do that. But somewhere along the line, someone told him the same advice that was given to me, and the same advice I'm giving to you, which is always do the right thing, no matter what. And sometimes you just have to follow your gut. So we got a great speaker here today, and so to introduce the speaker is Tom Vincent. So Tom's going to come up and introduce Commissioner Houston. Thanks.
All right, I want to make sure I don't blow this out. I tend to talk more loudly than I need to. I want to thank everybody for coming today, and especially thank Commissioner Houston and Brittany Lance for coming up from Oklahoma City today. I'll keep this brief because I know you're here to listen to her and not hear me. But I'll tell you that it's a little bit of excitement for me to introduce Commissioner Houston because it's been about 30 some odd years since I last saw her in freshman year in high school in Norman. So, and since then, as you're about to hear, she's done some remarkable things for our state. Those some things that you're aware of and some things you may not know about. So with that, please join me in welcoming Commissioner Melissa McLawhorn.
And he also said that he recognized me immediately because I looked exactly the same, right? I didn't hear that part in the introduction. Very sad. Yeah, 30 years, right? Isn't time just like going like the speed of light? Doesn't it just feel that way? It does to me. We have two sons that just started 5th and 6th grade this year. And so we have a 6th grader, middle schooler. I'm not in therapy about it yet, but I'm getting there. So I am feeling every bit of 30 years. So thank you for the introduction, and it's always good to see you again. And I also brought Brittany with me. Brittany Lance is the beautiful redhead who will be helping me out. I'm not a big PowerPoint person, and so they suggested that I have one, which so I haven't done this before with a PowerPoint, so we'll see how it goes if y'all just kind of bear with me. So Brittany's going to help me out. As far as what we're going to talk about today, what we're talking about is ethics during times of adversity. And unfortunately, we are living in times of adversity right now. We are living in some really challenging times. The discourse, the level of discourse in our country is something that we haven't seen in quite some time. We have, people talk about the breakdown of the family, the threats to religious freedom. We have terrorism that's taking place across the world. We have the most contentious election by the two most unpopular candidates ever nominated by either party. I mean, it's just, you can feel it, right? It's a kind of an adversarial time for a lot of us. And so the challenge is, how do you remain an ethical person in these times? How do you, when you feel that sense of being out of control and hopeless, which oftentimes leads to anger and leads to fear, how do you kind of maintain all that during these difficult times? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Before we do that, however, you kind of get a little bonus. You get a little 2 speeches in 1 today. Very lucky for you. I know you can't, you're just so excited. So the other thing that I want to visit with you about real quick before I get into kind of more of the substance of the speech is what we do at the Oklahoma Department of Labor. And the reason I want to do that is because when I was appointed labor commissioner, I had no idea what we did at the Oklahoma Department of Labor. And I have a feeling that many of you do not know what we do either, right? It's okay. I'm not offended. So part of my mission while I have this appointment is that I try and get the word out about the important work that the agency is doing. We actually touch many, many different aspects of your lives that most people just are not even aware. And so I've kind of made it my mission during the term of my appointment to try and get the word out. So what do we do at the Department of Labor? Most people think that we deal with labor issues. Kind of makes sense, right? So we really don't. Actually, the vast majority of your employment issues and your labor issues are handled by the United States Department of Labor. So I was actually giving a speech the other day while some guy was just ripping into me about the new overtime rule, which, by the way, if you haven't heard about the new overtime rule, very big deal, very impactful on business, and we do training and education on that. But this guy's ripping into me. I'm like, well, it's not, I didn't write that. Like, we're not trying to make that happen. That's at the federal level. So what we do as far as labor issues are concerned, a very small portion, we have what's called a wage and hour division. So when people are not compensated properly, when they've done work but they haven't been compensated, we can go and help get those wages for the employee. Now, if you've been with a huge oil and gas firm and you're owed hundreds of thousands of dollars in compensation, I guarantee you there is a lawyer who will take that case and bring it in court. These are cases that are usually a couple $100s that a lawyer's really not going to take on contingency. But a couple $100, when you've been a waitress, you know, that's food. That's someone's electric bill. And so the work that we do is very important in that area. So that's our labor area. After that, there are really 2 main areas that the Department of Labor focuses on that impact your lives. The first would be in the area of safety. And so if you are a public employer or work for a public employer, we are the enforcement arm for the safety piece. So schools, cities, counties, state, We're the agency that takes those claims, that investigates those deaths. We actually had 35 deaths in the state of Oklahoma last year due to workplace safety issues. I mean, it's a real problem. So we continue to work in that area. For the private sector, though, and I hope that I get my pitch in because this is super, super important. For the private sector, we provide a consultation service. It's called our Osha Consultation program. It's also known as Safety Pays. Huge, huge benefit to the state of Oklahoma that most people are not even aware of. What we can do is we can go into a private company. It is voluntary, it is free of charge, and it is confidential. We can't share this information with OSHA. But what we can do is come in and walk through an OSHA inspection with the company. We have industrial hygienists, we have environmental scientists, we have safety and health experts. We have really, really smart people who can do that for your company. Free of charge, confidential. And the reason that's important right now is because OSHA, if you haven't heard, has raised fines 80%, 8-0. There's really not a whole lot you as a company can do to combat that. What you can do is to prepare and to prevent, and we can help you with that. So if that's something that you're interested in, let me know afterwards, and we're happy to get you the information. The final kind of big area that we focus on is regulation. I'm a regulator, very exciting. We focus on regulation. What's interesting is the number of different areas that we regulate that have nothing to do with one another. We regulate elevators and boilers, CNG pumps. We license alarms and locksmiths and fire sprinklers. We also do amusement rides. Been very popular this summer, talking about amusement ride safety, which I should asterisk. The states that these incidents have been happening are unregulated states. I would just like to point that out, little asterisk, little shout out for the state of Oklahoma. So we regulate all those areas, and I won't get into, because that's not really the topic that we have here today, but we are doing some just really amazing things at the Department of Labor right now. We have opened up all of our rulemaking, so if you're in an industry that is impacted by any of those areas, feel free to be involved in that rulemaking process. My goal is to be very open, very transparent. I announced early on that I wasn't seeking election for the position, so it really is an opportunity, to get involved in the regulatory process in a way that is helpful for your business rather than hurtful. So if any of your businesses are impacted by these areas, I encourage you to give us a call and get involved in that process. It's very exciting stuff that we have going on. So thank you for letting me talk about the Department of Labor. It is, again, y'all didn't have any idea we did all that, right? No, totally no idea. See, that's why I'm doing this. Okay, so the question I often get is, how does one become a labor commissioner? And no, it is not because I wrote vast checks to Governor Fallon. I can assure you of that. I've been a public servant my whole career, so there are no vast checks to be written to politicians. But I have had a really interesting career in public service, and each one of those positions has really shaped me and shaped who I am and shaped my philosophy. And it's also, I think, taught me a lot of lessons along the way. You know, it's kind of interesting when someone asks you to speak on ethics, because you don't want to kind of stand, I am the, ethics expert. I'm certainly not. But these are, just some lessons and some things that I've learned along the way through a very diverse career and through some very contentious times and some very challenging times. And so hopefully sharing some of the lessons that I've learned might be of some help in some way. So as far as my background, I think it's important to understand people's background and kind of where they come from is really one of the keys to understanding people. And everyone has a story. My background has been a little bit different, but it's shaped me and it's shaped who I am. Probably foundationally, one of the biggest impacts that has occurred in my life outside of being a wife and a mother, of course. But one of the biggest things that has impacted kind of who I am and really led to my career path was at the very beginning of my career. So on January 19th, 1995, I was hired for my very first job out of law school as a baby lawyer at a sentencing think tank. I worked for the state for a criminal justice think tank. I was working for a sentencing commission, and we were housed in the Journal Record building. I was about 120 feet from the bomb that blew up the Murrah building. It was, an experience to have at a very young age and very early in your career can really impact your trajectory. I learned very early on that life is short. I learned a lot about kind of survivor's guilt and the need to kind of earn the fact that you've survived in some way. You see that a lot in veterans, where they'll talk about having earned surviving when so many people have not. And so that's something that really began very early for me and led me on the path, and something that I carry with me to this day. So very, very challenging time. I had a pretty hard time with it. I was not injured physically. I walked away. I was actually one of the only people in my office who did not go to the hospital, so I walked away. But mentally, I had a much longer journey. It was a lot more challenging. But I ended up, again, with those kind of lessons, knowing that I had to kind of do something and I had to be of use in some way. And so from there, I went to work for the Oklahoma Sheriff's Association. Well, I mean, can you imagine? I'm 27 years old, and I'm working for the 77 county sheriffs of the state of Oklahoma. They were okay with the fact that I was a woman. I mean, that really didn't bother them. The fact that I was a lawyer, not so much. And at the time, I was a vegetarian. It was really, really too much for them. In fact, as one of the requirements of the job, we were at Pete's place, and I had to eat a lamb fry. It was like, I think I had to prove I wasn't a communist or something. I'm not really sure what that was about, but it was an incredible experience. They were great people. I learned so much from them. I learned a lot about public safety and the criminal justice system and my passion for public safety. But what else I learned from them was my love of Oklahoma. I have literally been to every county in the state of Oklahoma, and it is amazing. It is one of the most geographically diverse states in the entire country. When you're in the mountains of Black Mesa all the way down to the rivers of Broken Bow, it is beautiful. And if you haven't been out, I encourage you to take advantage of it, because Tulsa is beautiful. I give you that. But the rest of the state is really beautiful as well. The other thing we have is across the state of Oklahoma, we have lots and lots of different types of people who have different types of backgrounds and different philosophies. And it really shapes how they think about issues. That's important for me to understand as a regulator, as a policymaker. When you talk about water, if you're from Southeast Oklahoma, you have a different attitude, a different background, a different reference point when you talk about water than if you're from Woodward, Oklahoma. It's just different. You think about it differently, your background is different, and so it's important to understand, especially when you're looking at a statewide level, that there is a lot of diversity of people. After the Sheriff's Association, actually 9/11 happened. And in my personal life, I'd been involved in some anti-terrorism legislation, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but after 9/11, it became obvious that each state was going to have to work on these terrorism issues. And so I got a call to go help set up some sort of agency to help deal with terrorism. We didn't even have the term Homeland Security then. I mean, that's how recent it all was. Got to go to the Office of Homeland Security, had an incredible experience there. One of the most important lessons that I learned there was that I don't know everything. I mean, when you get out of law school, that's what you're taught, right? You do know everything. I'm just kidding. But I don't know everything. I didn't know how to respond to a terrorist act. I wasn't a cop. I wasn't a firefighter. I wasn't an EMT. But what I did have was the ability to listen to people and listen to people from different backgrounds and people who were experts in those things, and to bring them together and to talk about how to make the state better, how to design a response system, how to communicate with one another. And the work we did there, we designed a statewide infrastructure that is still in place to this day across the state of Oklahoma. I got to go on after one of the Moore tornadoes, I think in 2013, and to see all the response units and vehicles that we had built and put together by those experts coming around a table and listening to one another was just the most incredible experience, that they actually have the tools they need to do their job. So I'm very, very proud of that, learned a lot there. And then from there, I went to work for the Attorney General. And that was really interesting. First of all, I got to be a lawyer again, which my mom was super excited about, because, you know, I paid a lot of money for that degree. So my mom was happy to say I was actually using it again. But I also, at that position, though, got to learn a lot about regulation. And it's something that has allowed me to be a better regulator. I understand when, at the federal level, they pass a rule and just say, okay, everybody go along with it. But they haven't thought through what impact that has on the local level. The overtime rule is a great example. $47,000 a year is the determining factor. $47,000 a year is not the same in New York City or in LA as it is in Oklahoma. It's just different. And to be a regulator and to not take into account the impact that your regulation will have at the ground level where you're actually trying to make a difference was an incredible lesson for me to learn as well. So it's been an incredible journey. I think each one of the positions that I have had has shaped me, has taught me something, and that's actually the advice that I give. I try and do mentoring from time to time, and that's one of the pieces of advice I always give, is to take advantage of as many experiences as you can. It may not be what you want to do for the rest of your life, but you'll learn something, you'll pick up a skill that you'll take to the next position that you go into. I worked in law school as a public defender, like one of the criminal defense clinics, and I learned really quickly I was not meant to be on the criminal defense side of things. I mean, it was an important experience for me to have to learn what I wasn't going to be good at and what I didn't have a passion for. And there are people who have that passion, I'm just not one of them. So it's good to have as many experiences as you can. So as far as ethics, the topic that we have here today, what is ethical behavior? Some sort of magic code, decoder ring that we all go to. What is it that tells us what is ethical? Brittany likes to give me a hard time that we have kind of a rule in our office that when we're making a decision to do something, I always ask first, is it legal? Because, you know, I got that going for me. Is it legal? Is it ethical? And then what will it look like on the front page of the Sunday paper? I mean, so there's sometimes that there are things that even though they may be legal, they may be ethical, you might not want to see it in the Tulsa World, right? Even though it's legal and ethical. So that doesn't really help us. I mean, you shouldn't guide your whole life by, is it going to look okay on the Sunday paper? But that is helpful for I guess, politicians. So what is ethics? To me, ethics is really about having a compass. And it's really appropriate that your logo is a compass, because that's really what ethics is about. How do I steer myself, navigate my way through whatever the situation is in a way that is consistent and fair and ethical? To me, it really falls into two different areas. One is kind of that foundational ethics, that ethics to your core. Are you an ethical person? What is your true north? When you're making a decision whether to take a position, whether to move, whether you're in a situation it's the right thing to do, what is your true north? And it's important for you to know that. It really is. Because as much as you're trying to listen to other people and understand other people, you also need to be aware of yourself and where you're coming from. And why you see it sometimes when you react to people in a certain way, sometimes they're reflecting something that that you may not be aware of that's in you that you need to work on or be aware of, if that makes sense. So some of it is self-awareness, defining what is your true north. For me, it's my faith. It wasn't always, but for me, it really is my faith and my family. And so whatever decision I'm making, it kind of circles around that. Being of service is really important to me. And so those are the kinds of things when you're deciding to be the labor commissioner in a horrible circumstance where the previous labor commissioner has been murdered and his widow is actively campaigning for the role, and you have an agency that's traumatized, and oh, by the way, you're going to take a $25,000 pay cut. Those are the kinds of things that let you make those decisions. You know, what's important to me? Well, I think I can be of service here. The governor is asking you to be of service. Well, I think that's important. How does it work with my family? Which is why I said I'm not going to run. I mean, those are the kinds of things that you need to identify and kind of have to your core. The second is situational. And I think it's important, I think sometimes, especially when you get in situations, you need to think about the outcome that you're trying to achieve. What is the true north in this situation? You get the difference? So one is kind of what is your core true north, but the other is like in this situation and what I'm trying to do, what is my true north? I think attorneys are pretty good at that during negotiations or mediations. They'll have an idea of, you know, what is the outcome that they're trying to achieve, and they'll kind of have some maneuverability in there, but trying to figure out where you're going. What is the goal you're trying to achieve? What do you want from this person? Like you'll see it in a marriage. I'm really good about communicating with my husband exactly what it is that I need from him at that moment, which I think he appreciates. I'm sure he would tell you that. But you know what I mean? Like when I come home from a bad day and I'm like, oh my gosh, and this person, and can you believe? And oh, and he tries to fix it. I'm like, yeah, I don't need that. The response I need right now from you is, oh, you are so right. You are beautiful and wonderful, and I love you, and you are just right. And so I'll just tell him, you know, just alleviate the suspense. I don't need an answer, just need a hug. But thinking about ahead of time, what is it that I'm trying to get at? What is the end that I'm trying to achieve? Whether it's emotional, I'm needing to be heard right now. I'm needing to be comforted right now versus I'm needing you to fix this right now. I mean, so thinking through what it is that you're trying to get to, I think, helps as way. And sometimes it's just to express yourself. That's okay too. Like I just need to get this, I'll say to Brittany sometimes, I just need to vent. Like I just need you to just listen to me right now. I just need to vent for a bit. So that's okay too. So what about specifically during times of adversity? And it's a little bit different, I think, than your day-to-day sometimes. What about during times of adversity, which, you know, clearly we are, as we talked about, we are in right now. I'm going to take this off. Do y'all care? Do you know who I am now? Okay. Take that off. What about during times of adversity? During times of adversity, it is even harder. Because when there is an adverse situation, you're emotional. You're fearful, you're angry, you're tense, you feel hopeless. And when you feel hopeless, I mean, there's a lot of theories actually that talk about the biggest cause of terrorism is hopelessness. That people who have hope don't become terrorists. Think about it. So in times of adversity, you have to figure out a way to gain control back. Control gives you a path. Control gives you a sense of, it gets rid of your helplessness because you're in control, you're not helpless anymore. And so during times of adversity, whether it's an argument or the society that we live in, during these things where you feel out of control, the goal is to get back into control, okay? And there really are only two things that you can control. You can control how you think about something, and you can control how you act. And both of those are very important. This is something that we actually talk about with trauma victims. A lot of where I learned some of this is when you have a trauma, you're out of control. And so you try and control the situation in sometimes unhealthy ways. And so this is about trying to control the situation in an ethical way and in a healthy way. So there are only two things that you can control. Think about it. Your mind and your action. That's it. So what about your actions? You can control your actions. You can control how you act towards certain people. That whole fake it till you make it kind of thing. You can control that. The first thing I think to try and gain back some of that control in a situation is to strive to understand somebody. Try to understand where they're coming from. One of my favorite prayers is actually the prayer of St. Francis, where it's, Divine Master, grant that I may seek, no, not so much to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand. Y'all ever heard that prayer? It's a great prayer. You should look it up. It's a great prayer. So trying to understand somebody, listen to them and try and understand where they're coming from. You would be amazed at how much you can learn about people. It is, somebody could come in with a bad attitude. You know, I mean, think about it. You're dealing with an employee. They've just got a bad attitude and they're just driving you nuts and you're having to deal with it every day. And then you find out, you know, their mom just got diagnosed with cancer. And they're leaving work every day to go to the hospital to deal with their mother, and then they've got a kid at home at the same time, and they're a single mom, and they're doing the best they can to juggle. So yeah, they're not bouncing off the ceiling when they come into work every day. If you take, now how does that change, you know, how you're dealing with them? So listening to people, the same thing on a policy standpoint, listening to people what it is they're trying to achieve. I do that a lot on legislation. I'm like, I don't understand why you're against this deal. Like, what interest are you trying to protect? What thing are you trying to, and once I understand where they're coming from, now maybe we can meet in the middle. The other action that you can do is to treat others, and this one drives me crazy. Baby lawyers are the worst too, or law students are probably actually worse than baby lawyers. Treating everyone with respect. And the reason I say baby lawyers are the worst, it's something about, I guess, our training, that when they show up at a law firm, the secretaries are secretaries, but I am a lawyer. Well, I can tell you, about a month out of law school, that secretary knows a heck of a lot more than you do. They do. I'm serious, right? And to come out with this attitude and this disrespect because they're, wow. And usually the secretaries will teach them pretty darn quickly how much more they know, which I always enjoy seeing. But it's important. You should treat people with respect. Everyone has intrinsic value. Everyone. I mean, some of that for me comes from my faith, but everyone has intrinsic value. Think about it. When you're on a trip and you're in Europe and you run into an Okie, y'all are like besties, right? Oh my gosh, you're from Oklahoma, so am I. Love you. We totally gotta hang out. I mean, think about how you treat them. They're here every day, right? I mean, why is it that we have to step away before all of a sudden we can see this intrinsic value in our fellow Okies? They're here every day. And we should treat people that way. We should treat people with respect. That's a way that you can control that. The third is to be gracious. My mama taught me my manners, and I think it's important to remember them. And I'm not talking about, which fork to use or whatever, but little things like saying thank you, saying please, saying thank you. Email is like the worst. Do this, set this meeting, make this happen. Do you take the time to say, would you please set this meeting? Thank you for making that happen. Controlling how you're interacting with people really controls how they respond to you. It's such a simple thing. And I'm telling you, go back and read your email. Hardly anyone does it. And it is so easy. It is such an easy thing to do. Hold the door for people. I'm not one of those. I'm not offended if you hold the door for me. Let me just get that out of the way. Not offended. Don't interrupt people. I mean, just common courtesy in the way we treat people. We can control that. No matter how bad a day you're having, it is not too hard to say thank you. The next tip is to be kind to one another. Yeah, if you can't do that, at least be civil. Like, I get it sometimes, I get it, but to at least be civil. And I learned a lot of this through my public policy work. I've spent 20 plus years at the state capitol. I have worked for Democratic governors. I have worked for Republican governors. I've worked for Democratic senates and houses and Republican senate and houses. And I have worked through the years with all kinds of different people in a way that I am not, like if I had ever approached a bill as, oh, well, you're against me, so I will never talk to you again, how far do you think I would have gotten or stayed out there? Like, life is long, and these people have memories. And when you are kind to people, even when you're disagreeing with them, you know what, we can just agree to disagree. That's fine. I mean, you have your position, I have my position, I've got it. You're a no vote, let me write that down. But I don't have to, and watch, and I will destroy you and make sure you have no money and you're, like, really? No. You need to be kind, or at least to be civil. And I think some of that, I mean, every job I've ever had was a phone call. Somebody called me and said, hey, would you come do whatever? And I think some of that is because I haven't burned those bridges over time. Do you know what I mean? So just being kind, or at least squeaking out civil. Also in the policy front, striving for collaboration. When you're working on policy issues, when you're negotiating something, when you're in a meeting, like, it's just, I just can't tell you how bad it is in politics right now. Everything is us versus them, and if you're not on my team, you must be destroyed. Where does that get us? If you can focus more on where is it that we're trying to get to, and maybe we can get there together, maybe we can't, maybe we'll be together on the next one. I mean, trying to collaborate what it is, very important. Another way that you can control your actions that I think is very important when you're really feeling down in the dumps and angry and mad and sitting in your mother's basement and call and talk radio and, you know, those people drive me nuts. When you're feeling that way, just do something. Do something. Go volunteer on a campaign if you're mad at your incumbent. Go volunteer for his challenger. Go down to a soup kitchen and feed somebody who doesn't have a meal. Go walk through the park and help pick up trash. Go do, like, get out of your mother's basement and go do something. Go to church if you're a prayerful person. If not, do something to be of service to others. It is amazing. The worst day that you're having, if you spend any time with someone who is homeless or homeless children, the worst day that you are having really gets put in perspective very quickly. So just do something. Get out of the house and do something. And the final area, as far as kind of controlling your actions, I think if you're really overwhelmed and you can't make it to the homeless shelter, like at the end of the day, just follow the golden rule. Like, how hard is that? Just treat people the way you'd want to be treated, I think is a good lesson that not enough people, unfortunately, abide by. The last area that I want to talk about, which is sometimes a little trickier, because the actions you can kind of fake, right? You just kind of go through the motions. The last area that I want to talk about is the internal piece, controlling your thoughts. And this is really the key to, I think, long-term ethical behavior and hopefully us as a civil society as well. Unfortunately for me, a lot of these lessons were lessons that I learned after the bombing. You know, after the bombing, I just really ended up in a really, just a really ugly place, a really dark place, and trying to deal with all that. And I found this quote. And I found this quote that said that life is 10% what happens to me, but 90% how I react to it. Y'all heard that quote before? Life-changing. How I react to it. How do I interpret it? How do I process it? And that really turns some things around. So what can you do internally? You can control your thoughts. The first thing is to try and always have a good attitude. And I don't mean in a Pollyanna skipping through, you know, seeing unicorns and rainbows kind of thing. But I mean just having a good attitude towards life. I didn't realize my grandfather, for anybody who knows me knows I talk about my grandfather all the time. My grandfather, the colonel, he was an Air Force base commander at Altus. He was an incredible man, super proud of him, named our first son after him. He was incredible. Anyway, my grandfather always had the best attitude. And he wasn't a particularly religious person, but he had this incredible attitude, this incredible presence. And he would tell you no matter what was going on, everything always works out for the best. Well, that would drive me crazy. I mean, can you imagine you're a 13-year-old girl and somebody's just broken up with me? Everything works out for the best. Yeah. Well, I didn't understand until I was older where that came from. So when he was in pilot training school, he was in Missouri, and he was messing around and jumped over, and this is, you know, in the 40s, jumps over a wall and falls and breaks his neck. Well, when you broke your neck back then, like, it was kind of done. And he disobeyed a direct command to get up, and he said, no, I'm really hurt. He spent a full year in a body cast. Full year. Body cast. Weren't sure he was going to live, wasn't sure he was going to make it, wasn't sure he was going to walk. Full year in a hospital, not moving. Horrible, horrible. Can't imagine anything worse. Every single person he trained with went to fight in Europe, and every single one died. My grandfather survived. He went on to fight in the Pacific Theater and lived to the ripe old age of 91. But he always taught us, no matter how bad something would seem, at the end of the day, when you would look back on it,